My mother-in-law, Diane Whitmore, dumped my tote across her dinner table and a blue velvet jewelry case slid beside my keys. "The sapphire brooch is gone," she said, pointing at the brass cabinet key she had once given me as proof I belonged. My husband Ethan asked whether there could be some misunderstanding. I am Rachel Bennett, 35, a property claims specialist who had spent 6 years following Diane's insults because I loved Ethan and believed patients could keep a family together. But this was not another insult. While Ethan asked me to cooperate instead of asking her to prove it, I refused to confess, apologize, or pay for something I had not taken. I would preserve every fact and trace every claim. On the drive home, Ethan showed me Diane's message. She would keep authorities out of it if we replaced the brooch from our house savings. Then I understood she was coming for my name and the money meant to build our future. By the time Ethan and I turned onto our street, Diane's message had burned itself into my head. Replace the brooch from our house savings, and she would keep the authorities out of it. I kept seeing the blue velvet case tumbling from my tote onto her dining table. Then Ethan asking whether there could be some misunderstanding. I had spent 6 years believing that surviving my mother-in-law meant protecting my marriage. That night, I knew I had to protect myself. In the driveway, I asked Ethan to show me the message again. Diane had written that replacing the brooch quietly would be best for everyone and that she needed our answer by morning. She is asking us to pay for something I did not take. Ethan rubbed his face. She is asking us to make this go away. I told him I would not admit, sign, or pay for anything I had not done. He said money could be earned back. I asked whether my name could. He had no answer. Inside, I opened my laptop and created a folder called Whitmore Brooch. I saved the message Ethan forwarded to me, then wrote down only what I had personally seen. Diane accusing me at dinner, the empty jewelry case falling from my tote, her pointing to the brass cabinet key on my ring, and her refusing to return my bag until I gave the key back. I did not write that she had planted the case because I had not seen her do it. Facts first. That was the rule I used as a property claims specialist, though I had spent years explaining away Diane at home. Ethan asked whether I really needed to treat his mother like a claimant. No, I said. I need to treat this like an accusation. He asked me to return the cabinet key that night because Diane said it belonged to the from my ring. She had given it to me after our wedding as proof I was trusted, with WIB-SP evidence. At dinner, she had turned it into evidence. I will give it back, I said, but not as a confession. We drove back before midnight. Diane opened the door without inviting me inside. I placed the key on the entry table when she told me to, then watched her photograph it before picking it up. She said she was documenting what had been returned. Ethan murmured my name in warning. I kept my voice level. Then document that I deny taking the brooch. Diane stared at me, handed back my tote, and told Ethan they would talk in the morning. On the drive home, he said I had embarrassed her. She emptied my purse in front of your family. Ethan stared through the windshield. She thinks something happened. Diane could accuse, search, threaten, and document. I was expected to absorb it quietly so everyone else could stay comfortable. I did not sleep. Months earlier, Diane had asked me to look over household insurance paperwork, so I searched my email and found the original message with the brooch appraisal attached. The sapphire and diamond piece was shaped like a spray of leaves. One leaf bent inward, and the clasp had a visible repair near the hinge. The details were written in the appraisal and visible in its photographs. I saved the original email, attachment, and message header. Ethan came downstairs and asked what I was doing. I told him I had found the appraisal Diane herself had sent me. He asked whether this was really how I wanted to spend the night. How would you spend it if someone accused you of stealing jewelry worth more than our down payment? He looked at the appraisal and went quiet. If we agreed to replace the brooch, the money we'd spent Ethan saving for a home would vanish. By morning, Diane sent Ethan a repayment proposal. It said that if we transferred the appraised value from our joint savings, she would consider the matter resolved within the family. The sentence that stopped me described the payment as in Rachel's possession. I read it 3 times. 3 times. This is an admission written for me. Ethan said Diane was scared and probably wanted formal language. I asked why fear required my signature beneath a statement saying the brooch had been in my possession. He finally said maybe signing was still better than police, lawyers, and had built an escape route with a price. Our house fund and my acceptance of blame. Disgrace. was being used to make me surrender. Both. I told Ethan the money would not move. For the first time in our marriage, I changed the direct deposit for my next paycheck to an individual account while leaving our existing joint household funds untouched. I would not let my future wages be volunteered to purchase Diane's silence. Ethan looked wounded. Some part of me still wanted to comfort him. I did not. The appraisal showed what the brooch looked like, but not when it had disappeared. I went through recent Whitmore photographs, searching for the glass front cabinet in the background. Most were blurred. Then I remembered Megan Whitmore, Ethan's cousin and a freelance event photographer, who had taken pictures at a family lunch about 6 weeks earlier. I remembered where she had stood because Diane had made everyone move twice for a better group shot. From that corner, Megan's camera had faced the cabinet. I texted her without accusing anyone. I said, Diane had accused me of taking the sapphire brooch and asked whether she still had the original, unedited photographs. The typing dots appeared, vanished, then returned. Megan wrote that she probably did, then asked why Diane would care whether she kept raw files. It was strange, but it was not proof. I replied that I only needed the original image and its date. Ethan saw Megan's name and told me not to drag relatives into this. Weird. I am asking for a photograph, I said. He warned that I would look obsessed. Your mother searched my bag in public. I am past worrying about looking impolite. That afternoon, Ethan took calls in the bedroom with the door shut. I did not know whether he was talking to Diane, so I did not send the photographs. At 5 minutes after noon, Ethan came downstairs and said Diane's offer was off the table. I asked what came next. He said he did not know. Once, that uncertainty would have made me give in. Diane rarely had to state the next punishment. Ethan imagined it for her, and I had spent years helping him prevent it. This time I refused. I printed the repayment proposal and placed it beside the appraisal. Ethan asked if I was preparing to leave him. It hurt because I had not said that and still loved him. I am preparing for your mother to do exactly what she says she will do, I answered. He said that if this became legal, his family would think I had chosen it. I almost asked whether he did too. I was afraid of the answer. Before dinner, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A man introduced himself as an insurance investigator and said he was calling about a reported loss involving a Whitmore family sapphire brooch. He wanted my account of the incident. I listened twice and saved the message. Across the room, Ethan went completely still. Until then, he had called this a family problem. Now there was a claim, an investigator, and my name inside a process I had not started. I looked at Diane's repayment proposal, at the appraisal, and at the empty place on my key ring where the brass key had hung for years. My own house suddenly felt smaller. Diane had cut me off from the family room by room. Ethan was asking me to preserve peace by surrendering ground, and now an outsider was calling because of a story she had told. I saved the investigator's number and opened a fresh page in my notes. If Diane meant to close every door around me, I needed to know which one she had already locked. The first door Diane had locked was not the one to her house. It was the one between Ethan and me. The next morning, I called the insurance investigator back with my notes open in front of me. His name was Daniel Mercer, and he identified himself as the investigator assigned to the reported loss of the Whitmore family sapphire brooch. I asked for the claim number and when it had been opened. His reply made my pen stop. Diane had already filed the claim and named me as the person she suspected. The reported loss date was the night of the anniversary dinner. I gave Daniel only facts I could support. Diane had accused me before relatives. An empty jewelry case had fallen from my tote after she emptied it, and I denied taking or possessing the brooch. I said Diane had once given me an old brass key, but I did not know whether it opened the cabinet at the time of the alleged loss. I requested future questions in writing. Then I looked across our kitchen table at Ethan. You told me this had not become official. You told me this had not become official. Ethan stared at his coffee. Finally, he admitted Diane had told him she was contacting the insurer. He said he had not known how far she would take it. You told me she had not gone formal. He said he wanted one peaceful night before everything exploded. I almost laughed. His mother had searched my bag, demanded our savings, and reported me as a suspected thief, while my husband had protected me from the truth, as if information were the dangerous thing. I told him I would no longer rely on him to tell me what Diane had done. If he learned something, I would verify it myself. You are treating me like the enemy, he said. No, I am treating you like someone who decided I could afford to know less than your mother." He looked hurt. For once, I did not rush to repair it. After he left for work, I returned to the appraisal Diane had emailed me months earlier. Instead of seeing only a piece of jewelry, I studied its identifying details: a sapphire and diamond spray, an inward bent leaf, repaired the clasp near the hinge. I searched public auction archives and estate catalogs to use on combinations of those details. For almost 2 hours, I found only similar pieces. Then an archived listing opened with a photograph that made my breath catch. By breath catch, the bent leaf was there. So was the repaired clasp. The measurements were close to Diane's appraisal, and the smaller stones appeared in the same arrangement. The item had sold 3 months before the dinner. I saved the public listing and compared it with the original appraisal. Similar was not the same as proven, and my work had trained me to respect that difference. Still, the date changed the shape of the accusation. If this was the Whitmore brooch, then it had not disappeared during dinner. If this was the drawing, Diane's demand that Ethan and I drain our house fund would have forced us to cover a loss that existed before she searched my bag. I read the repayment proposal again, especially the sentence claiming the brooch had been removed inadvertently while in Rachel's possession. The words now looked like a ready-made explanation for money, moving from our savings into a hole I had not created. I printed the auction listing and put it beside the appraisal. That evening, I showed Ethan both pages. I did not say Diane had sold the brooch because I could not prove that. This appears to be the same piece, and it sold 3 months before your mother says it disappeared. Ethan studied the photographs, then said antique jewelry could look alike. I agreed. So when did you personally last see the brooch? He said he remembered Diane wearing it at family events. I asked which one. He could not name a date. Had he seen it at the anniversary dinner? No. At the family lunch 6 weeks earlier, he was not sure. I told him I was asking what he had seen, not what Diane remembered. His face tightened. Why are you trying so hard to prove my mother is lying? Something inside me cracked. I am trying to prove that I am not. Ethan said Diane would never be careless with something tied to his grandmother. I told him that was a belief, not evidence. He accused me of talking like I was at work. At work, no one expects me to accept a claim because the claimant is somebody's mother. He pushed back from the table and said I was making everything impossible. I asked what would make it possible. Letting the family believe I won from her, he did not answer. He packed an overnight bag and said he was staying at Diane's because he needed space. I wanted to tell him that going to the woman accusing his wife was not neutral space. I let the front door close without saying it. Megan still had not sent the raw photograph from the earlier family lunch. I did not pressure her. I needed the original file, not a nervous relative to hear. Instead, I organized what I had. Diane's message offering silence and for repayment, the unsigned proposal, the appraisal email, the auction listing, my notes from Daniel Mercer's call, and Ethan's admission that he knew Diane had contacted the insurer before he denied it to me. None of it proved who had sold the brooch. But the timeline was cracking. By midnight, I understood something uglier than the accusation itself. Diane did not need Ethan to declare me guilty. She only needed him to keep asking me to surrender before the facts caught up. The next afternoon, a process server knocked while I was working from home. After confirming I was Rachel Bennett, he handed me a thick complaint demanding the appraised value of the brooch and alleging that I had wrongfully taken trust property. Diane? My name appeared again and again beneath claims I knew were false. Her dinner table accusation was now part of a system where deadlines mattered whether she was truthful or not. I called Mara Ellis, a civil attorney whose name I had saved after the investigator first contacted me, and took my evidence folder to her office. Mara read the complaint and then the auction listing. She told me not to confront Diane with conclusions the records did not yet support. Because Diane had chosen to sue me, however, my defense could seek relevant records through lawful discovery. I asked about the retainer. The amount would come from money Ethan and I had saved for our future, the same fund Diane had already tried to reach. Signing meant accepting that the quiet version of my marriage might already be signed anyway. I would rather spend money defending the truth than hand it over in exchange for a lie. When I returned home, Ethan's side of the closet was half empty. He had taken more belongings while I was gone. There was no message from him, only missed calls from Whitmore relatives I did not return. I set Mara's copy of the complaint beside the appraisal and auction listing. Diane had the family, the accusation, and for the moment, my husband's loyalty. I had an evidence folder and a lawsuit I never wanted. But by taking me to court, she had opened a legal path to the records behind that auction. I was more alone than I had ever been in my own home, and for the first time, no one inside it could stop me from following the paper trail. The paper trail was the only thing in my house that still felt solid. Ethan's coffee mug was gone from the drying rack. More of his clothes had disappeared from our closet, and every room carried the shape of someone who had chosen somewhere else to sleep. I could not control where my husband went, or what Diane told the Whitmores. I could control what I knew. Mara Ellis, the civil attorney I hired after my mother-in-law sued me, had told me to separate proof from suspicion, so I spread the timeline across my dining table. Diane's appraisal email, her demand that Ethan and I replace the brooch from our house savings, the insurance claim naming me, the archived auction listing from 3 months before the dinner, and the civil complaint accusing me of taking trust property. One question still sat between all those pages. I did not know who had consigned the brooch. That morning, Megan Whitmore finally texted me. Megan was Ethan's cousin, a freelance event photographer, who had taken pictures at the family lunch 6 weeks before Diane accused me. She had found the original filed link and opened the photograph I remembered, the one taken from the corner facing Diane's glass front cabinet. Behind Ethan's uncle, the velvet-soaked stand where the sapphire brooch was usually displayed was visible. It was empty. I checked the file information. The image had been created on the afternoon of that lunch, 6 weeks before Diane claimed the brooch disappeared. I called Megan and asked only what I could verify. She confirmed the timestamp came from her camera and said she still had the memory card backup. I asked her to preserve both. The photograph did not tell me who removed the brooch, but it destroyed the dinner night timeline Diane had given her insurer. I sent the original file to Mara, not Ethan. That hurt more than I expected. 6 years earlier, I would have shown my husband first because I believed difficult discoveries belonged inside a marriage before they belonged anywhere else. Now I was afraid anything I gave Ethan might reach Diane before I understood it myself. Mara said Megan's photograph strengthened our reason to seek records from the auction house, but she reminded me that it still did not identify the seller. The legal request went out for the consignment agreement, identity verification, intake photographs, and payout records connected to the public listing I had found. Diane's attorney objected that the auction had nothing to do with my supposed theft. Mara answered with the appraisal details, the public listing, and Megan's dated photograph. Then another legal bill arrived. I paid it from the money Ethan and I had saved for a home. Diane had wanted that money as reimbursement. Instead, I was spending it to prove I did not owe her anything. Ethan came by that evening for more clothes. He saw the closed evidence folder on the table and asked whether I was still digging into his mother. I told him I was defending myself in the lawsuit she filed. When I said Megan's original photograph showed the cabinet display empty 6 weeks before the dinner, he shut his eyes. "Rachel, if you keep doing this, there may not be a family left to go back to." I asked whether he believed I stole the brooch. He said no. I asked why I was the one he kept asking to stop. His answer came quietly. "Because you are the one I can still talk to." That sentence explained more than he meant it to. Diane had spent years making the more reasonable person carry the burden of peace, and I had helped teach Ethan that my limits could always move. I told him they would not move anymore. He left without asking to see the photograph. Several days later, the auction house confirmed that responsive records existed. We still had to wait for formal production, and the waiting was brutal. I wrote down every possibility I could think of because I did not want anger to become certainty. Maybe another Whitmore relative had consigned the brooch. Maybe Diane had authorized someone else to sell it. Maybe the auction piece only looked identical. Mara and I compared the appraisal's photographs with the auction images anyway. The repaired clasp had the same uneven crescent of solder near the hinge. One decorative leaf bent inward at the same angle. A small diamond near the center sat slightly lower than the stones around it. The measurements matched within the auction house's rounding. It looked like the same brooch. But I refused to call it proven until an independent record said so. The records arrived on a gray Thursday. Mara asked me to come to her office. She placed a packet in front of me and explained that the auction house had produced the consignment agreement, intake photographs, identity verification, and payout instructions for the lot. I turned the first page. The consignor's name was Diane Whitmore. Her address appeared underneath it. A copy of her driver's license had been used for identity verification. The intake photographs showed the same sapphire spray with the repaired clasp and bent leaf. The payout instruction directed the sale proceeds to an account in Diane's name. Before she emptied onto her dining table. The sale she emptied my tote onto her dining table. The sale had closed before Megan photographed the empty display stand. For several seconds, I could barely hear Mara speaking. I kept seeing the anniversary dinner, Diane dumping my purse in front of her relatives, the empty blue velvet case sliding across the table, her finger pointing toward the brass key she had once called proof that I belonged. The paperwork in front of me showed the matching brooch to an auction house and directed the proceeds to herself. It did not tell me every thought in Diane's head. And I would not pretend it did. It did establish an action I could no longer explain away. She had consigned the brooch before accusing me of taking it. I asked Mara whether the records were enough. She said they were powerful, but she wanted formal authentication. The auction house's records manager, Caleb Torres, provided it through a business record declaration. That was how I first learned his name. Caleb verified that the consignment documents were kept in the ordinary course of the auction house's business, that Diane Whitmore was the recorded consignor, and that the proceeds were sent according to her submitted instructions. His confirmation did not depend on Megan, Ethan, me, or any Whitmore relative. An outside business had documented Diane as the seller. The truth was no longer resting on my comparison of two photographs. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I cried in Mara's parking lot. Some part of me had still been searching for a misunderstanding large enough to save my marriage. Caleb's authentication took that away. Diane had sold the brooch, received the money, and later accused me of stealing it. If Ethan and I had paid from our house fund and signed her proposal, our money would have filled a loss created months earlier, while my name supplied the explanation. The next question was whether Diane had been allowed to sell it. Her lawsuit described the brooch as trust property. Mara told me we needed records from the bank, serving as independent co-trustee, but I could not simply call and demand private family information. Through the dispute, Mara submitted the specific item information from Diane's own complaint. That was how Karen Lee entered the case. Karen was a trust officer at the regional bank serving as independent co-trustee of the Whitmore Family Trust. I knew her role from Mara, and I received no informal details from her. The bank reviewed the proper channel that the sapphire brooch appeared on the signed trust inventory. The authorization ledger contained no recorded approval for its sale. I called Mara as soon as I read her summary. So Diane did not have permission. Mara corrected me carefully. The bank records showed no recorded authorization required for that disposition. Precision mattered. The brooch was an asset Diane was responsible for helping safeguard, and the records showed no approval for the sale that put the money into her account. The bank then opened a formal review of the missing asset, and Mara warned me that discretionary trust activity could be restricted while it was examined. I did not know who received what from the trust, and I did not ask. My phone told me enough. Ethan's aunt accused me of ruining Diane. A cousin asked whether I understood how many people might be hurt. Another relative said, family business should have stayed inside the family. I saved what mattered to the dispute and ignored the rest. For years, exclusion from the Whitmores had terrified me. Now almost all of them were angry with me, and I was still standing. I finally saw how much I had sacrificed to avoid this loneliness. I had mistaken endurance for strength, and my willingness to absorb discomfort had made me the easiest person to pressure. Ethan knocked on our front door that weekend instead of using his key. I told him the auction records had been authenticated, and the bank had confirmed there was no recorded authorization for the brooch sale. His first question was whether I really had to involve the bank. I reminded him that Diane had sued me over trust property. How was I supposed to defend myself without finding out what happened to it? Ethan said the review could hurt people who had nothing to do with our marriage. I told him this stopped being only about our marriage the moment his mother accused me of stealing from a trust. Then he asked whether I wanted Diane punished. I said I did not know what the bank, insurer, court, or anyone else would ultimately decide. I want my name out of her lie. He sat at the kitchen table, where we once discussed paint colors for a house we thought we would buy. Ethan said Diane was under enormous pressure. I asked what pressure changed an auction record. He did not answer. Then he said his mother believed I had always resented the Whitmores. I almost defended myself with 6 years of evidence that I had tried to belong. I stopped. What do you believe? I asked. Ethan looked down and said he thought everything had gone too far. That is not an answer. He rubbed his hands together, then reached into his coat. He placed a folded document on the table. Diane's attorney had prepared a draft declaration for him to review. Ethan said he had not signed it. One paragraph said I had gone upstairs alone during the anniversary dinner. Another said I possessed a key giving me access to the display cabinet. A third referred to financial pressure. Ethan and I, supposedly faced before the brooch disappeared. I looked at him. Did you see me take the brooch? He said, no. Did you see me open that cabinet? No. Did you see me go upstairs alone that night? Ethan hesitated, then admitted he did not remember that happening. The declaration frightened me more than Diane's messages. The auction records were pointing toward her. The bank was examining the trust. She could no longer control the history of the brooch, but she still had access to the person whose word could hurt me most. I asked Ethan why he had brought the draft. He said he did not know what to do. My husband was holding a statement containing things he could not verify, prepared for use in a case against me, and he was still describing honesty as a decision too difficult to make. I told Ethan that if he gave back toward him, I cannot choose for you. I told Ethan that if he gave a say only what he personally witnessed or let assumptions become facts because his mother needed them. Because I would not coach him, beg him, or make his fear easier by sacrificing myself again. He folded the pages and put them back inside his coat. After the door closed, I stood in the kitchen with Megan's photograph, the auction records, Caleb Torres's authentication, and the bank confirmation spread across the table. For the first time, the evidence gave me more power than Diane's family story gave her. But evidence could not make Ethan break. Diane had lost control of the brooch's paper trail, so the next thing she was reaching for was my husband's name beneath her version of the truth. If he signed it, I would not only be fighting the woman who framed me, I would be fighting the man I had spent 6 years believing would never stand on the other side. If Ethan signed that declaration, the evidence would not disappear, but the last private place I had once called safe would. I spent the next morning rereading the draft with Mara Ellis, my civil attorney, who had helped me obtain the auction records proving that my mother-in-law, Diane Whitmore, had consigned the sapphire brooch months before accusing me of stealing it. The draft said I had gone upstairs alone during the anniversary dinner, though Ethan had told me he did not remember that happening. It said my old brass key gave me access to the display cabinet, though neither of us had verified that the key still worked. Then it referred to our supposed financial pressure, as if saving for a house made me desperate enough to steal from a trust. Mara warned me not to treat an unsigned statement as testimony. Ethan still had a choice. So did I. For 6 years, whenever Diane became difficult, I had softened the consequences for Ethan. I changed plans, swallowed insults, apologized for tones I had not used, and accepted explanations that made no sense because he looked miserable when his mother was angry. I had called it compromise. In practice, Diane created the pressure and Ethan carried it home until I relieved both of them by yielding. This time I texted him one sentence. If you make any formal statement, tell only what you personally saw. He replied that he understood. I did not ask whether understanding would be enough. 2 days later, Ethan asked to meet at the house. He arrived carrying the draft in a manila envelope and said Diane had told him directly that refusing to support her meant choosing me over his entire family. She says everyone will know what I did if I turn against her. I asked what he would be turning against, his mother or statements he could not verify. He paced our kitchen and said I was making the question too simple. The facts are simple, I told him. The consequences are what scare you. Ethan said some relatives would never forgive him if he contradicted Diane publicly. I believed he feared that because I had watched him organize his adult life around avoiding her disapproval. But fear did not make the draft true. Had he seen me open the cabinet? No. Had he seen the brooch in my possession? No, I told him I would not choose for him. If he lied, that choice belonged to him. If he told the truth and lost relatives, that choice belonged to him too. I cannot keep paying for your relationship with your mother. Not with money, not with my name, and not with my silence. He asked whether I still believed Diane had tried to take our house savings. I placed her repayment proposal beside the auction record. The proposal demanded payment from our joint savings in exchange for treating the matter as resolved and used language implying the brooch had been in my possession. The auction record showed Diane had sold the matching brooch months earlier. I do not have to guess what signing would have done, I said. It would have moved our savings to cover a loss that existed before she accused me and put my signature under her story. Ethan stared at the pages. That was the cruelest shape of the scheme I could prove so far. Diane had built a route toward our future home fund and expected my fear to open it. Ethan told me he had taken the declaration to an attorney of his own. He did not repeat any legal advice, and I did not ask. He said only that he had not signed Diane's draft and intended to give a factual statement about what he remembered. Relief moved through me so quickly that I almost mistook it for forgiveness. Then I remembered the weeks before. His suggestion that we pay, his lie about Diane contacting the insurer, his move into her house, his warnings that my defense was destroying the family. Refusing to sign false statements mattered. It did not erase any of that. I told him I was glad he would tell the truth. Nothing more. The shift in Ethan did not stop Diane. Mara received another production from the insurer, including claim notes and an email preserved in the file. The email was from Diane to her insurance agent. Its timestamp was from the afternoon before the anniversary dinner. Diane said the family brooch was missing and identified me as the person she suspected had taken it. I checked the time twice, then the reported loss date. Diane later tied the loss to the dinner, the same dinner where she emptied my tote and used my old brass key against me. Yet hours before I arrived, she had already written that the brooch was missing and named me as her suspect. My hands went cold. Until then, one narrow possibility had remained. Diane discovered the loss, panicked, and then destroyed it. She had constructed the accusation before the public scene. I could not prove who put the empty velvet case in my tote because I had not seen it happen. I could prove that Diane told her agent I was responsible. The humiliation at dinner was not beginning of her after she had Borman was not the beginning of her story. It was a performance after the story already existed. Mara told me to build the chronology. 3 months before the dinner, auction records showed Diane consigned the brooch and directed the proceeds to an account in her name. 6 weeks before the dinner, Megan's original photograph showed the display position empty. The afternoon before the dinner, Diane emailed her insurance agent saying the brooch was missing and naming me. At dinner, she emptied my tote, displayed the empty jewelry case, and pointed to my brass key. Afterward, she offered to keep authorities out of it if Ethan and I replaced the brooch from our savings. Then came the insurance claim and the lawsuit. Every step after the sale pushed responsibility away from Diane and toward me. One more date changed everything: the trust's annual asset review. Karen Lee, the regional bank trust officer serving as independent co-trustee, had confirmed through the formal process that the brooch remained on the trust inventory and that the authorization ledger contained no recorded approval for its sale. The review was only days after Diane demanded repayment from us. I could not know exactly what Diane intended beyond what the records showed, but the practical effect was unmistakable. A trust asset had been sold without recorded authorization, and to proceed the scheduled review, she created a theft explanation naming me and tried to obtain replacement money from Ethan and me. If we had paid and I had signed, the missing asset would have had both an explanation and replacement funds. That realization hurt more than the insult at dinner. Diane had always criticized things that belonged to me: my work schedule, my last name, the fact that Ethan and I wanted a home outside the neighborhood where most of the Whitmores lived. I had treated those remarks as hostility. Now the future I had been building with Ethan had become useful to her. Our savings were distance. They were a front door. Diane did not control. Her proposal would have drained that possibility while tying the payment to an admission against me. Whether she chose me because I was convenient, because I had questioned paperwork before, or for some reason I could not prove, the mechanism was clear. My fear of losing the family was supposed to make me finance the lie that protected it. The next evening, Ethan brought me a copy of the statement he had submitted through his attorney. I read only what he chose to show me seat. He said he attended the anniversary dinner, did not see me take the brooch, did not witness me up in the cabinet, did not see me open the cabinet, and could not state that I went upstairs alone. He acknowledged that I once possessed a brass key Diane had given me, but did not claim it opened the cabinet that night. The statement contained no grand defense of me and no accusation against Diane. It was simply limited to what Ethan could honestly say. Diane's draft had wanted more. Ethan's signed statement gave her less. He said his mother had told him not to come back if he filed it. I knew that only because Ethan told me directly. His voice cracked, and my old instinct rose immediately. Comfort him, promise Diane would calm down, become the bridge again. Instead, I said I was sorry he was hurting. He asked whether this was what I wanted for him to lose his family. I wanted you not to help them lie about me, I said. Those are not the same thing. Ethan looked toward the stairs and asked whether he could come home. I could not give him the answer he wanted. Telling the truth was necessary, but it did not restore trust by itself. He said he had finally chosen me. You chose not to sign something false, I said. I will not turn basic honesty into a favor I owe you for. He left without arguing. I cried after the door closed because loving him had not stopped being real, just because my limits had become real too. Mara and I prepared the chronology for the bank and insurer, Diane's appraisal email, Megan's full resolution photograph and metadata, the archived auction listing, Caleb Torres's authenticated auction records, Karen Lee's trust confirmation, the repayment proposal, and the pre-dinner insurance email. I added no theories about conversations I had not heard or motives I could not document. The records were enough. Mara submitted the material through the proper channels, and the bank scheduled an emergency trust review. The notice changed the atmosphere immediately. Whitmore relatives who had ignored Diane over a family misunderstanding. One said I had humiliated Diane of putting I had distributions at risk. Ethan's aunt said I had no right to burn down the family over jewelry. I did not know which relatives depend on the trust what amounts were involved, so I refused to repeat assumptions as facts. What I knew was that the bank had scheduled a formal review because authenticated records raised questions about an asset Diane was responsible for safeguarding. To the family, Diane's conduct was private, and my refusal to absorb it was betrayal. For the first time, their rejection did not make me wonder how to win them back. It made me see how much power I had surrendered to people who required silence as the price of belonging. Diane had accused me before the dinner began. She had tried to move our savings toward a loss created months earlier. When the auction records surfaced, she had tried to reinforce her story through Ethan. None of that became less real because relatives preferred the old hierarchy. The night before the review, I placed every document in order on my dining table. The brass key was no longer with me. Diane had taken it back and photographed its return. For weeks, the empty spot on my key ring had felt like proof that I had been expelled from something valuable. Now I saw it differently. Diane had given me that key as a symbol of trust and later used its existence to make me look guilty. It had never guaranteed belonging. It represented access she believed she could define. Ethan called shortly before midnight. He said the bank had requested his attendance for part of the review because of his statement. He sounded terrified. I was frightened too, but not because I feared being cast out of the Whitmores anymore. I feared only losing control of the truth after fighting so hard to reach it. I told him I would see him there. I did not promise we would sit together. When the call ended, I closed the evidence folder. Diane's accusation had begun in a dining room where she controlled the audience, the objects, and the rules. The next confrontation would happen in a room where timestamps, signatures, bank ledgers, and authenticated records mattered more than family rank. I had the sale, the empty display photograph, the unauthorized trust disposition, and Ethan's refusal to repeat what he had not witnessed. Diane could still deny, blame, threaten, or cut me out of every make-the-brute relationship she controlled, but she could no longer make the brooch disappear a second time. By morning, the family story would be placed beside the paper trail. This time, Diane would not be the one deciding which version everyone was allowed to hear. By the time I walked into the bank the next morning, I no longer needed the Whitmores to believe me. Mara Ellis, my civil attorney, met me outside the conference room and reminded me to answer only what I knew from records or personal experience. Karen Lee, the trust officer serving as the bank's independent co-trustee, sat at the far end of the table. Ethan arrived and took a chair across from me. Diane came in with her attorney. She did not greet me. For years, a room full of Whitmores had been enough to make me measure every word. This room was different. No one asked whether I had been a good daughter-in-law. Karen asked for dates. I explained that Diane had emailed me the brooch appraisal months earlier when she wanted help organizing insurance paperwork. Mara submitted Megan Whitmore's full resolution family lunch photograph, which showed the display position empty, 6 weeks before Diane said the brooch disappeared. The bank already had Caleb Torres's authenticated auction records showing Diane as the consignor and recipient of the proceeds. Karen matched the brooch to the trust inventory and stated that the authorization ledger contained no recorded approval for its sale. Then Mara presented Diane's email to her insurance agent, where Diane had already described Rajt as is and named me as described the brooch as missing and named me as the person she suspected. I did not say the empty velvet case had been planted because I never saw anyone put it in my tote. I said only what I had witnessed. Diane's attorney tried to turn the review toward family conflict. He suggested I'd be angry about money and hostile toward Diane. Karen kept returning to the same questions. When was the asset sold? Who signed and where was the authorization? The answers did not change. Diane had spent years controlling conversations by making every disagreement about loyalty. At that table, loyalty could not alter a timestamp. When Ethan was asked about the dinner, he said what I had already read in his statement. He did not see me take the brooch. He did not see me open the cabinet. He could not say that I went upstairs alone. He confirmed that Diane had once given me a brass key, but he could not verify that it opened the cabinet that night. Hearing him say those things in front of Diane hurt more than I expected. I had wanted that honesty weeks earlier. Still, his words mattered. Diane no longer had the family witness her draft declaration had tried to create. Near the end of the review, Karen announced that Diane's authority over the trust would be suspended while the bank conducted a broader audit of the asset disposition and related records. Any discretionary activity requiring her participation would be restricted during the review. Karen did not speculate about criminal responsibility, and neither did I. Diane looked toward Ethan. He lowered his eyes. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, she could not redirect the consequences toward me by demanding that I apologize, pay, or leave the room. Outside the bank, Ethan asked whether I felt better. He said his mother might lose everything she had built inside the family. I asked what exactly I had taken from her. I had not sold the brooch, written the pre-dinner accusation, filed the insurance claim, or sued myself. I had answered documents with documents. Ethan said he knew that, but watching his family collapse was still painful. I told him I understood. I also told him I could no longer make his pain the reason I accepted harm. The formal accusations began falling apart soon afterward. Daniel Mercer, the insurance investigator who had first called me, sent my attorney notice that the claim had been referred for special investigation after the insurer reviewed the auction and timeline records. He did not tell me what final action the company would take against Diane, so I did not invent an ending for that process. A short time later, had voluntarily dismissed her civil complaint against me. There was no apology, confession, or admission attached. For one afternoon, the absence of an apology kept me furious. Then I realized I had spent the entire ordeal waiting for Diane to give me something she had always controlled. Approval, belonging, an explanation, eventually even innocence. I did not need her confession to know what the records proved. I printed the dismissal notice, placed it in my evidence folder, and closed the folder. That evening, Ethan came to the house and asked if we could talk about us instead of Diane. We sat at the kitchen table, where he had once told me replacing the brooch might be cheaper than losing his mother. He said refusing a relationship he did not know how to rebuild. He said he had finally chosen me. So decent. I wanted those words to heal something. They did not. You chose not to say things you could not verify, I told him. You asked me to pay her. You hid the insurance claim from me. You left this house and went to hers while she was accusing me. You kept asking me to surrender because you thought I was the safer person to disappoint. But Ethan said he had been afraid. I believed him. Fear explained his behavior better than cruelty did, but explanation was not repair. I told him I still loved him. Saying it aloud hurt worse than anger because it removed the easy version of leaving. I was not walking away because I felt nothing. I was walking away because love had become the argument used to make me tolerate what should never have been mine to carry. He asked for another chance. I told him I was separating from him. For a second, I saw the man I had married instead of Diane's frightened son, and I almost broke. Then I remembered the blue velvet case on the dining table, the demand for our house fund, the investigator's voicemail, and the empty closet after Ethan moved his things to Diane's house. I had spent weeks building a factual record because the people closest to me kept asking me to doubt myself. I could not build a new life on another promise that things would be different once the crisis passed. The Whitmore family reacted quickly. Messages arrived from relatives who had barely spoken to me while I was expected to keep showing up politely. Some blamed me for the trust restrictions. Others said Diane had made a mistake but did not deserve to lose her son too. Ethan's aunt accused me of using the brooch to destroy a family that had welcomed me. I remembered the brass key Diane once put in my hand as proof that I belonged, and how quickly she later pointed to that same key when she needed a thief. I sent one boundary message through Mara regarding Diane. No direct contact. Any necessary communication related to the litigation aftermath or separation would go through agreed legal channels. Then I blocked Diane's number and the relatives who kept sending accusations after I asked them to stop. I did not ask Ethan to defend me to them. Whether he corrected their story was his responsibility now. The isolation I had feared for years finally arrived. No Sunday invitations. No family group messages, where Diane decided who was respectful and who was difficult. I lost traditions I had once worked hard to earn. I also lost the constant sensation that one wrong sentence could change my place at the table. The emptiness hurt, but it did not suffocate me. I rented a small apartment across town while Ethan and I began the formal separation process. Moving theirs had already eaten into the savings that were supposed to become a house. I mourned that money. I mourned the house we had imagined, and the marriage I thought would exist inside it. Freedom did not refund those things. It meant the losses were finally mine to choose, instead of payments demanded by someone else. A certified envelope arrived through Mara not long after I moved, released after it was no longer needed with the evidence surrounding Diane's accusation. I held it in my palm. After our wedding, Diane had given me that key and told me it meant I was trusted with Whitmore history. At the anniversary dinner, she turned it into a weapon, yet the documented timeline had made its true value clear. The key did not prove I had access when the brooch supposedly vanished, and the brooch had already been sold months before that night. I could have thrown it away. Instead, I asked Mara to send it back to Diane's attorney by certified mail. I did not include a letter. Returning it was not an apology, a peace offering, or a final argument. It was the last object in my possession that tied belonging to Diane's permission. On my first quiet evening after the envelope went out, I carried groceries up to my apartment. At the landing, I reached into my purse and found one key in the side pocket. It was plain, newly cut, and meaningless to everyone except me. I unlocked my door and stepped inside without wondering who had approved my presence there. For years, I thought freedom would feel like winning an argument in front of the Whitmores. I thought Diane would finally be exposed, and everyone would understand why I had endured so much. That was not the freedom I found. The bank could audit. The insurer could investigate. Ethan could decide what kind of son and husband he wanted to become after I was gone. Diane could tell whatever version of me she needed to tell. I no longer had to live inside it. I closed the door behind me and turned the lock with my own key.